From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is the Morning Edition. I'm Tammy Mills, filling in for Samantha Salinger-Morris. It's Wednesday, May 28th. A few years ago, Australia earned the unenviable title of allergy capital of the world. This could well have been true, with a World Allergy Organisation review finding Australia had the highest rate of food allergies for children under 5. But since then, something happened to turn allergy advice on its head, and parents have been introducing allergens to children at a far younger age than they used to. So where are we at now? Explainer reporter Jackson Graham is here with us today to discuss whether the new strategy has worked. Welcome, Jackson.
Thanks, Tammy. Really great to be here.
Jackson, first up, can you explain what allergies are and how you know if you actually have one?
So if you talk to teachers, chefs and allergy specialists today, they'll basically tell you that there's been a big rise in allergies and intolerances in their jobs. There's around 5 million people living with allergies in Australia, and up to a third of the population is expected to experience an allergy sometime in their lifetime. I'm one of those. I have a tree nut allergy. I found this out when I was 4 years old. I was at home and I was annoying my grandmother, who was living with us and recovering from a hip replacement. My mum was making a nut loaf in the kitchen, and so to distract me, she gave me a Brazil nut to try to crack open with my hands. And then almost immediately, my fingers started swelling. There was this really great pressure. So it was so bad, it caused me to actually bite my fingernails, which meant that I ingested a tiny fragment of the nut.
Oh, right.
And from there, I started to have anaphylaxis, so coughing, wheezing, hives breaking out all over my body. Fortunately, my parents got me to a doctor pretty quickly, and ever since I've basically had to avoid anything with nuts. So I've never had an almond croissant, a Waldorf salad, a dukkha chicken, or even something like Nutella. But after all these years, I only really delved into what makes this any different from an intolerance recently. In fact, I actually used to work as a waiter, and I remember the endless allergies that used to come in and intolerances, and I'd have to understand and ensure people didn't eat the wrong thing.
So what's the difference between an allergy and an intolerance?
So remarkably, around 65% of the world's population has some degree of intolerance to lactose, for example. There's a bit of a crossover between allergies and intolerances. Intolerances cause allergy-like symptoms, bloating and cramps after drinking milk, or a rash from soap that irritates your skin. But in general, the key difference between an allergy and intolerance is the allergy affects the immune system. It's basically because the immune system has learned that certain proteins in things like eggs, cow's milk, peanuts, tree nuts, shellfish, bee venom, pollen, or even animal dander is a threat to the immune system. It's learned that. So antibodies called IgEs become attached to a person's immune cells, and basically those cells detonate almost. It's when the body comes into contact with the protein again. So it sets off this sort of chain reaction. So then, the next time the body encounters these things, it sends the immune system into meltdown. Some people will become congested, they have itchy eyes, they sneeze, they vomit, or it can be life-threatening, setting off this reaction, which is known as anaphylaxis, where someone's throat closes over or their cardiovascular system shuts down. That's, of course, unless they're administered quickly with adrenaline. The difference is that the allergies have this potential to make people extremely sick through anaphylaxis.
Okay. And so where does Australia sit in comparison to the rest of the world in terms of allergy rates? Like, has that actually been going up, and are allergies more common now?
That's a great question, Tammy. So if you ask any paediatricians, there's definitely a consensus that allergy rates have gone up in recent decades. But unfortunately, cases weren't really measured that well before the 1990s. So there certainly are stories out there of people who suffered allergies well before then. Actually, in fact, my mum was one of those. She, would get hives from certain pollen as a child, and maybe, there's some genetic basis for it, which is interesting. But we've had great studies in Australia. In 2011, the Murdoch Children's Research Institute found that food allergies affect about 10% of all children in Melbourne. And this particular study gave rise to the catchphrase that you mentioned in the introduction, that Australia is the allergy capital of the world. For this young age group, that could well be true. 2 years later, the World Allergy Organisation found that there was the highest rates of food allergy were, in fact, in children under 5 in Australia, followed by Finland and Canada.
Yeah.
But for food allergies among anyone under the age of 18, Britain actually topped that list, and Australia ranked 11th. So I think the the data globally is a bit patchy, but there certainly is a picture emerging that allergies are affecting a large part of the population. And hay fever is another example. It affects something like 1 in 5 people in Australia. So, look, there's a consensus among allergists that basically they are seeing more and more of these cases. And I think although the data is difficult to prove, it seems to be the case.
It's kind of surprising because I guess the image or perception of Australia is that we're like outdoorsy people that are hardy and wouldn't have such things such as allergies. But what's happening in Australia? Like, why do we seem to have more children with allergies?
Yeah, that's a great point, Tammy. And indeed, we're sort of seen as, not being too, overly cautious about exposing ourselves to allergens and germs and things like that. So probably the biggest difficulty with allergies is that we don't know exactly what causes them. This actually has a big effect on the whole thinking around allergies. They're a bit of a challenge to know. There's certainly a challenge to know how to prevent. So there are several theories about what causes them, and you sort of touch on one there. The biggest is that there's something called the hygiene hypothesis. It's important to really note here, though, that these are just theories. Like, there's probably not one cause for allergies.
Okay.
And, to put in the language of scientists, it's what they call multifactorial. So there's probably a range of things going on that are causing allergies.
Okay.
The hygiene hypothesis basically says that as society has industrialised more, it's become cleaner, and meaning that we're less exposed to germs and dirt than in the past. There are even studies showing a relationship between living on a farm or having a dog at home that suggests that these children are less prone to allergies.
Okay.
There's other theories that are linked to this idea that actually zoom right into our gut and suggest that within something called the microbiome, we don't have the right mix of viruses and bacteria that are supporting the immune system, and that might be making us more susceptible to allergies. Other theories suggest that we don't get enough vitamin D exposure. Maybe the weather or our genes play a role too. So as you can see, there's all of these factors. What I found really fascinating when I was working on this piece is that one researcher named Professor Cheryl Van Noonen in Sydney's Northern Beaches found a tick bite was in fact causing cases of meat anaphylaxis among sort of older age groups, so not children. They had all never previously had an issue when eating meat. And basically, the tick picked up a sugar molecule called alpha-gal, which they passed on to humans when they bit the human too. So meat anaphylaxis cases seem to have increased when fox baiting was introduced and the animals the ticks fed off proliferated. So this is a bit of a niche allergy. It's anaphylaxis from to meat later in life. But what's interesting is that it perhaps sums up the challenge with pinpointing the causes of allergies. As you can see with this case, there's this complicated interaction between the environment and our biology at play.
It's surprising, right? Because you would have thought, well, at least I would like to think that with all that we know and how far ahead we are with science, that we would be able to find a cause for allergies. So that's super interesting. What about the age that children are exposed to allergens? Does that have anything to do with it?
So around the time I was diagnosed, parents were told not to introduce children to common allergens before 3 years of age. And now, ask any new parent and they're told basically to introduce things like nut butters, cooked egg, cow's milk to their babies from between 4 months and at least before 12 months of age. What allergists have found out in recent years is many children avoid getting food allergies if they're introduced to the food early enough. Okay. The thought here is that it seems to prime the immune system being introduced to the food.
Okay.
So the old advice wasn't helping, and maybe even it was contributing to people getting food allergies. It's a remarkable change to have the advice shift so dramatically and has been a task for health professionals to teach the public about.
We'll be back in a minute. This is bringing up very vivid memories for me as a new parent myself, and having gone through the list of allergens and testing your child, at around 6 months or before they're 12 months of age. So I can definitely relate. One of the really things I found fascinating about your piece is that you spoke to the professor who was actually responsible for turning this advice, so when to introduce children to allergies, on its head. So can you tell us a bit about what led him to this discovery?
Yes, so his name is Gideon Lack, an allergist in London. Changing advice like this it must be the most amazing moment in any researcher's career. It's fascinating to learn the backstory. Of course, he was soaking in the world of allergies for years, which is worth noting, which obviously helped him know what the right questions were to ask. But what really spurred him along was asking paediatricians at a conference in Tel Aviv in the early 2000s how many children they saw with peanut allergy. Their answer was hardly any, whereas in London, it would have been nearly every doctor. What he found was many parents in Israel gave their children a snack called bamba, basically a corn puff dusted in peanut butter. He went and tested the rates between Israel and the UK and then set up groups of British children exposed to or not exposed to peanuts from an early age and found that exposing the children to peanuts showed a 90% reduction in peanut allergy.
Huge. And did this flow on to what happened in Australia?
So in 2016, we changed the guidelines to introduce allergens to children between 4 months and 12 months of age. And the result of that is that it appears to have slowed the rate of peanut allergies in Australia. It hasn't stopped them or reversed them, but it has certainly slowed their increase. The rates of hospital presentations have dropped for nearly every age group following that advice. But they, interestingly, slightly rose for babies younger than 1, the group who the advice applies to the most.
Okay.
Yet even then, when she zooms in on this age group, this group of babies who are having the allergens earlier than they otherwise would have, the rise in presentations don't actually equate to more admissions into those hospitals. And crucially, it doesn't actually result in more cases of anaphylaxis.
Okay, so it's possible that there's a reaction of some kind, and because parents are giving babies these allergens earlier, so then they're rushing to hospital to make sure it's not an anaphylactic reaction.
It's possible, there could be, a skin rash as a result of the food, being applied around the mouth rather than in the mouth, or little triggers that, make parents think perhaps, this is a reaction, but, it's not actually leading to more admissions.
Oh, interesting. Another thing that I found fascinating in your piece is this possible link between eczema and allergies. What's this about?
Okay, this is fascinating. So Gideon Lack in London has found children with dry or broken skin, so basically eczema of varying severity, are more likely to develop an allergy. I should flag here that the evidence for this is still circumstantial rather than proven through a rigorous study. But the thinking is that perhaps proteins from, say, peanut butter get passed into the baby's skin when people touch them or they're around the food.
Okay.
Maybe this leads to the immune system learning those proteins are a threat rather than getting to know them through the digestion process. It's an interesting theory and could be one explanation for how food allergies come about. So, of course, the early introduction of food through small portions put into babies' mouths, as health authorities now advise, could be one way of blocking off eczema as a possible cause or pathway for allergies.
Okay, so you're kind of saying there that it's if a baby or a child has eczema and if a parent, say, touches them with peanut butter or some such on their hands, even without meaning to, or like just within the throes of daily life, which you would, that possibly that could be causing an allergic reaction, potentially.
Basically, the body would be encountering that allergen for the first time through the skin rather than through the mouth.
That's so interesting. But the long of the short of it is there seems to be no solid answer for what causes allergies, which is highly annoying, but I guess that's humans for you. But what about cures for allergies? Is there a cure for one?
So there have been treatments such as antihistamine, which many of us will have heard of, and that's been around since at least the middle of last century, and that for allergies such as hay fever. And of course, there's adrenaline for anaphylaxis. But for food allergy, there have been few actual cures in Australia, at least. So the one that has shown the most promise is offered in the United States, and it's a form of immunotherapy, oral immunotherapy, where someone is given small doses of the food under controlled conditions over potentially months until they build up their tolerance to it.
Yeah.
Not everyone responds to it, but it does seem to desensitize many people. Allergies can be very sensitive to the ups and downs of the immune system on any given day. So something like a cold or even exercise can actually influence how severe someone's reaction is. So that's one reason the dosages have to be tightly controlled rather than simply sort of administered at home. There have been families in Australia who have actually travelled to the US to get this treatment, but fortunately it is becoming increasingly available here too. There's a program in 10 hospitals across Australia at the moment for babies with peanut allergy. It will be interesting to see if this gets expanded to more allergens and older ages and further hospitals. I guess in the meantime, living with an allergy makes people like me at least a little more cautious. At the worst, it's living with a lot of worry, such as navigating a trip overseas or a dinner party invitation that can feel like walking on eggshells.
Given the allergy that you have, what was the most surprising thing about this piece that you've written? What did you discover that was new and interesting to you?
Probably that, early introduction advice is really surprising to me because, obviously when I was a baby that was never around. I would have never eaten a nut before that day where I was handed, a Brazil nut and basically had it in my hands. And I was 4 then. So the idea that babies should be sort of given these to kind of prime their immune systems, long before they even reach 1 year of age is a big change in advice.
And in such a short space of time, really.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose the other things that surprised me was just how alert you have to be to all of the different, kind of possibilities of what could cause allergies. And it's probably, as we talked about, it doesn't have one cause. So it's hard for us to think about that, there could be like multiple things working together that are kind of causing us to become more prone to allergies.
Well, thank you so much, Jackson, for your time. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Thanks, Tammy. Thanks so much for having me on.
And for anyone wanting more information, please do check out Jackson's explainer on our websites, or you can find a link for it in our show notes. Jackson, thanks again.
Thanks, Tammy.
Today's episode of The Morning Edition was produced by Josh Towers. Tom McKendrick is our head of audio. To listen to episodes of The Morning Edition as soon as they drop, follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And to support our journalism, subscribe to us by visiting The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe and sign up for our Morning Edition newsletter to receive a comprehensive summary of the day's most important news, analysis and insights in your inbox every day. Links are in the show notes. I'm Tammy Mills. This is The Morning Edition. Thanks for listening.